Tech Snippets today with Joseph Raczynski.
Asher Lohman, Vice President of Data and Analytics at Trace3. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to this. So today we are trying to uncover how AI is reshaping the fight against fraud. We're going to focus in on how AI could possibly make some difficult changes for people as they move forward, as you crack open the magic of this machine learning, spotting sneaky behavior, detecting anomalies, and sending real-time alerts faster than ever. So the idea we're trying to encapsulate here is, can AI outsmart fraudsters while keeping pace with their tricks? So we're going to try to find out this, and we'd love to learn a little bit more. So Ash, we're really happy to have you on today. So one of the things I'd really like to know before we get into all of that is what led you down the path of becoming Vice President of Data and Analytics at Trace3? What brought you on board? What excited you maybe years ago that led you down this road?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that's it's been an interesting journey for me. I mean, as I've come through my career in technology, I've kind of taken a couple different paths and different roads throughout those years. But it seems like the evolution of this type of data-driven insights really drew me in. Finding a way to take my information or my company's information and make better decisions with it in a much faster way was absolutely something that I was interested in growing. So I've spent time in lots of different areas in technology, lots of different industries, transportation, healthcare, financial services. And now that I'm at Trace3, I'm able to help lots of different organizations with these similar problems and trying to solve the challenges of how do they take their data and make the best decisions possible as fast as possible so they can make as much money as they can move products faster, support their customers better. That's kind of the ultimate objective.
Amazing. Okay. No, I really appreciate that background. So if we're to start looking at AI versus human, if we even want to call it that, but in terms of fraud detection, at a
Mhm.
top level, what does this new world order look like when we're talking about this AI sort of being able to do things that we never thought would be able to do as early as it now can? How are fraud detection mechanisms becoming better in this space?
Yeah, it's one of those things that's a double-edged sword because while the tools are becoming better to prevent fraud, they're also enabling some of the fraudsters and hackers and people that are doing malicious activity. They're giving them tools to do it more efficiently as well. So what we're finding with some of these technologies is we're putting them in place in order to help accelerate the ability to stop something bad from happening. And financial services is a great example where a lot of the implementations of these technologies is happening because it's right on the cusp and it's the most valuable for a fraudster to go after. So things like putting in place adaptive learning, having these machine learning models actually understand how an individual user is interacting with the system, how their employees typically interact with the systems. And then when there's deviations from that, let's put some pause in place, right? So if I'm interacting, I always log in from my home address or from this geographic area most often. Here's the way I usually do it from my mobile app. I usually go here first. If these things start changing, let's stop this. Let's stop the process. Let's prompt for another password, prompt for some biometrics if you can. That's really where those adaptive learning capabilities come into play. And at the same time, behind the scenes, you're building that pattern. So there's data that has to happen across the board from the systems that they interact with all the time. But there could be external systems that you might want to pull data from. Maybe there's other things that you have access to, typically from maybe their social profiles or other things that are publicly available data that you may be able to take advantage of to then build a profile of your persona that actually prevents those hackers from being able to impersonate that.
Really interesting. So are you talking a little about some NLP, some natural language processing on that
Yeah, so the
component of
NLP
it?
is a great example of where we've kind of taken this new AI market. So NLP, for those that are not familiar, is being able to take things that are not structured. So your emails, your text messages, your interactions with maybe the customer support, all of that data that they're typing in and entering. Now we can have the AI go and read through all of that. Again, things that you've given permission to, of course, but be able to go and read through that to then continue building your profile and doing that unstructured analysis. It also helps with preventing social engineering attempts. So social engineering, the ability for somebody to kind of obfuscate, maybe not a system, but go to you as a person and get you things like your password or other things like that. We can build language models that kind of prevent and detect those deceptive things.
So You know what this makes me think about a lot is, let's say there's another person that's the dark version of you, who's the expert in this space, and they decide, you know what, I've had it with this world, and I want to change things, and I want to leverage some of these AI tools for malfeasance, for awful things, which is really horrible to think about. But I mean, this is things that we have to start to think about. And they leverage AI to do what you sort of just described. So I think about a scenario of geofencing. So where maybe Chase or Bank of America knows exactly where I am when I've used my phone, and it says, okay, Joe's actually out of the country. He's normally not doing that. He usually works on his banking information from like 8 a.m. till 12 p.m. So that 4 hour window, and now you're able to train the AI to use a VPN that knows where generally Joe is, and it knows the pattern of the time frame that he's actually working on it. And the tools that are out there for intercepting, unfortunately, dual factor authentication. If people are still using phone numbers, text messages for that, try to shy away from that. But I mean, you get the idea. If you have someone that's gone dark, that's using the same tools that you're describing, they're always a little bit ahead of the game. How do we combat that level of engineering?
Yeah, I mean that's an extremely difficult thing to do because now the things that we have easily be able to identify as like a phishing attack because of maybe there is mixed language that's not spelled correctly, things like that. AI is fixing those errors. So these generated AI phishing emails or even chatbot assisted types things where they're texting you and interacting with you, that's all AI driven. That makes it much more difficult. So I think that from a like an institution perspective, an enterprise perspective, there's a lot of things that can be done both on the technology side, but also on the personnel side. I mean, making sure that your people are well trained and aware of these types of deceptive capabilities, especially on the social engineering front. Then you, like you said, putting in these like advanced AI scenario solutions that can understand those threats, that can require authentication, that understand what a person's profile looks like and how they interact. And then also, at the technology side, how do we make sure that when I log in, it's going through that rigorous review of my profile and information, but also not so restrictive that now I can no longer even access the information I'm trying to that's legitimate. So there's this really fine line you have to walk to be able to allow access where it makes sense, but then also, you know, maybe even creating synthetic information to align to that person based on the way that they're interacting with the system. So like you said before, this geographic area, this is even to the point where when I'm typing on my keyboard, the cadence that I'm using is actually identifiable. So I type differently than you type. Those are different things that can be used to build that profile.
That's amazing. Now, I've heard stories about that. It's almost at that point you're almost talking about like key logging in the sense of the key logging itself and also the timing, the cadence of that. That's that's a lot for people to, if they knew that that would potentially be happening, for them to wrap their heads around. But if it's to stamp out fraud, then I understand why they might want to do that. But really interesting to think about, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things I'm kind of curious about is, I spent a lot of time on different algorithms and digging deeper on some of these things. And one thing that Sam Altman said recently was that he's expecting in the coming years, maybe a year or 2 years, that one of the most troubling but also most powerful things that's coming out from AI is how convincing it will be. So you've certainly played around with the tools, I'm sure yourself.
Mhm.
The voice interactions that we have, so the cadence, the feeling, the emotional attachment to the voice itself that's being produced by AI is unbelievable. Now you match that up with something that basically knows everything, either about the individual or about what's going on in the world. And then it's able to play this game, maybe calling someone up and pretending to be, and then of course using a deep fake voice, be maybe the son of a parent, of an elderly parent. How do we fend off those types of attacks that are within months, if not a year or two away?
Yeah, they're already happening, and I mean even the deepfake audio has been going back for a couple of years now, but now the sophistication of it, like you alluded to, is much higher. So there's a couple ways that as an individual you could combat this. We actually have been talking quite a bit about this internally at Trace3 because we had one of my colleagues who, sometimes you may answer a call, you may not know who it is, and maybe and you may say hello, who's this, blah blah blah. what they're doing is actually voice printing you doing that.
Yeah.
So what I recommend is don't even answer the call if you don't know who it is. Typically somebody will, go to voicemail and maybe you can listen to it then. But if you don't understand the number, I know it may be difficult sometimes to do this. Don't answer the call. There have been numerous cases, including my colleague, where they have recorded his voice and then called an elderly grandparent and actually tried to extract funds from them using his voice, and it sounded extremely realistic. That's another example. So I highly recommend don't answer the call, don't respond to a text message that you don't understand or that's not somebody that you've solicited unless you are expecting it. Again, that's another way for them to identify your phone number and that it's a valid account. And then, going to more of the deepfake video, that's become, I think, where we're going to be going to the future as the most extreme. Because now we have people's likenesses and voices being emulated in a way that is very realistic. We even have an example. There was a Hong Kong company recently who the CFO was on the call, plus a bunch of other C-level executives, and the CFO was interacting with this individual from the accounting department and had them wire over $25 million out of their accounts completely deep faked. Not a single person on that call was real, except for the person that answered it. So, that is extremely unsettling. And it kind of is interesting because as a culture within an organization, you want to have trust and you want to have openness, but this culture of skepticism now is going to have to bleed into what an organization teaches its employees because if you're not skeptical of an email that you may receive, it could be a phishing attempt or a phone call or a text message, and you could become the next person that's going to be on the news reporting or sending information from your company.
Yeah, and I feel like the biggest targets are the ones that are probably out there already, like maybe known individuals, because their voice, their likeness, their video, their audio is already on one of numerous videos for their company or for whatever. And then more and more individuals, just yourself, whether you have Facebook, and you can train it off of that. So the voice. So even like when you're saying like, oh, send it, which makes a lot of sense. Do not answer call. I don't myself, don't answer calls. But even if you're gonna send it to voicemail, if you have your own specific voicemail entree that you basically said, hey, I'm not available right now, blah, blah, blah. They're also potentially able to leverage that too. But yeah, it's very, very difficult.
Mhm.
Um, Maybe the bigger picture, what are some of the ethical considerations that you are starting to think about when you're looking at all of this? How do we handle this from that side?
Yeah, I mean the ethical implications of information is massive, right? So my personal information is being used to train models about my profile, but what else is it being used for? And that's also a huge concern. And I know there's a number of states that have now started implementing different types of legislation to protect the individual from that. And again, that it's a double-edged sword because you want to be able to enable an organization to create a profile that can protect my information and data, but at the same time, there's fear that there could potentially be access to my personal information. Especially if we start doing video and things like that. So in situations like the grocery store where they're using video analysis to see where your eyes are looking, that helps with marketing, that helps with product placement, but also helps with you finding what you're looking for. So there's again these different ways that we have to be very careful to make sure that we are managing the data properly, that we've put the preventative measures in place to not let my data be exfilled from that organization, but it also increases that organization's risk profile. So those are different, a couple different capabilities or things that we have to be careful of. And then also as we're builders, so at Trace3, we build and develop algorithms and machine learning solutions for clients. We need to make sure that we're doing it in a way that is observable and transparent. So why did that AI algorithm make that decision? Tell me the information. So we've seen that with some of the most recent AI or open AI algorithms and LLMs that have come out. They have an explainability portion to what they're doing, and that also helps with the openness.
That's huge. I mean, I've been talking about AI for the last 10 years, and it's one of those things that you always had this black box in the corner, and the algorithm, people never really understood why it was producing what it was producing. And there were going to be jobs coming out just trying to crack that. And it looks like we're on the beginning stages, from my vantage point, of being able to start to do that because it's so critical to all of this. Wondering what's happening behind the scenes is very, very important. Interesting. So, one of the things I'm curious about is what do you see as organizations that are trying to stamp down fraud doing on sort of the cutting edge of discovery and figuring these things out. I remember 10 years ago, and this is way before it became a bit of a norm. I joined a bank and it required me to do like a selfie with my ID. And so I was able to read the information there, plus the picture and kind of match that up. And then eventually it moved to an actual video of 30 seconds where I did move my head, pivot my head left and right, and say a few sentences. And the last thing I'll mention is my bank today, one of them, won't mention the name, still says, hey, you can use your voice as your way of accessing your information. And now I'm just like, in the last few years, it's like, oh, please, I hope they will stop this soon. So that was kind of cutting edge a few years ago. Now, is there anything new that you've seen that's kind of interesting on that sort of front?
There's a few things, and it's now become like similar to any other way of securing data. It's a multi-layered approach. First off, things like this real-time transaction monitoring, the ability to actually monitor every single transaction, and a transaction can be a click on of a mouse, like that simple of a transaction to identify customer behavior, like we've been talking about. That obviously is kind of the next gen of what we're talking about here, to then identify those anomalies. So how I anomalously or how I interact with the system, is it anomalous or not, and determine that. But also then continually building that neural network of processes, that data that we're talking about, to find those hidden patterns. That's a huge part of it. So right now we're in the collection phase, if you will. I mean, there are absolutely some layers of the behavior analytics happening, but we're more in the collection phase. As the data grows, we can start building these networks of information to make it a much more granular process of identifying a person, or identifying that transaction is accurate and legitimate. So that's one. You mentioned biometrics with your voice. I think we'll see expanded biometrics. So we're already seeing it with our mobile phones, having the ability to use your facial recognition, doing the voice printing, doing fingerprint identification. Those types of things are just another layer that we'll continue to see. I think probably more baked into everything that we work on. And then, like I said before, kind of those behavioral biometrics, the typing cadences, how we use our devices, those types of things will also become important. We're already doing things in banking, especially around encryption, but I think we'll do more of that. So, we'll start doing what's called tokenization. That's kind of the next generation of encryption, and it'll replace kind of what the sensitive data with non-sensitive data equivalents are, so that we can tokenize that information. So if it is accidentally leaked, it's not valuable because it doesn't have the actual information into it. And then there's a few others. I mean, things around deepfake detection. Obviously, with deepfakes, we need to be able to identify that. So how do we use AI to find those things that are being manipulated within the media itself? That's going to be one. And there's a bunch of other things, but kind of starting at the top, it's continuing to grow the biometric side, adding behavioral biometrics, and then moving into this behavioral analysis of my interactions.
Really interesting. No, all that stuff is fascinating to me. There's two parts that sort of jump out to me. One was, what about the privacy concerns? Are there privacy concerns when you get down to the point of how someone's typing something in? And of course, let's say they're writing their name and do it really quickly, but they always do it in a certain fashion. I mean, is
Mhm.
that something that needs to be disclosed upon the collection of that information, or is that just a part of your opting into using their services?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination. I mean, I think what we're finding is the more open you are about communicating how you're collecting information, um, and allowing the individual to accept that that's an okay policy for them is critical. At the same time, as an individual consumer, I think the more safeguards that an organization, especially a financial institution, is putting in place, the more comfortable you are, doing that, your banking there, and having your money protected in that way. So there is some level of, yes, we need to have some level of informed consent. But at the same time, we understand that we're using these similar types of ways to access applications all the time with facial recognition within our iPhones or Android phones. Yes, there are certainly definitely those things that we need to be careful of, but as long as we understand how, and if we probe the company, how are you mitigating, my biometric information? Is it securely stored? Are you complying to the certain biometric regulatory acts, those types of things? Then I think there's a comfort level that you have, understanding that, yes, they're putting in place safeguards for my protection, and they're protecting the data.
Perfect. Okay. And the second, and maybe last question I have before I turn it over to you, if there's anything that you'd like to bring up, is along the tokenization thing. So that is something that I've been talking about for God knows, 7 or 8 years now. It's near and dear to my heart. It's some solution I think is fantastic, but you will tell me otherwise. From my vantage point, it's all about like zero knowledge proof. So zero knowledge and your ability to tokenize data such that you're able to disclose a little hash of information. You're able to prove that maybe that's my birth date or whatever the case is, but you can expire it. You can no one, whoever intercepts that will not be able to understand what that is. I mean, is that what we're talking about, hopefully, as the future here, or is that a portion of that?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical as we think about the volume of transactions that are happening that have sensitive data in them. So yes, we've already been doing encryption of the network and other things like that, data at rest, even data behind the firewall, but the actual transactional integration with the data, because AI may be integrating with that data, you want to make sure that we're putting it in and we're limiting our data transmission attack vector, right? So the ability to use tokens instead of actual sensitive data, we completely will minimize the risks that that information gets transmitted in the clear or intercepted in some way, which is how most of those attacks with the man in the middle and that kind of thing have happened in the past. And then as we see this move towards more contactless or mobile payment using your phone as a tap to pay, we have to be able to tokenize those payments, so that instead of the transaction being my actual credit card number going over the air or over the connection, it's a token of some sort, which is not valuable to the individual that's trying to steal it. So like there's a few others like that, but I think those are the biggest ones for me that stand out.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm going to ask one more. I saw that Visa is now going to be playing around with some Ethereum blockchain-based tokenization of assets and transactional data. Do you think this is sort of the beginning of some connection into blockchain?
I think so. I think, blockchain's been uh, on the verge of every, especially on the financial institution side, implementation plan, but nobody can really get their heads and hands around how they actually do that in an open ecosystem. And this could be a way for them to do it, almost blockchain as a service for that token or for that set of information. I see that definitely becoming where we go in the future because it does provide that layer of transparency, but also that layer of security where, if the blockchain is somehow broken, the data is not valuable to that individual. So similar to tokenization, I see that certainly being a different use case, but maybe related.
Yeah, really interesting. Okay. Asher, anything else that you'd like to bring up?
I mean, overall, I think the biggest thing is, when you're trying to protect your personal data, be as suspicious as possible. Don't just provide information. Don't interact with random people or calls or texts that you don't know. And then if you're looking at your financial institution, understand how they're protecting your data. Look at the metrics and things they've put in place, so that you can make sure that at the end of the day, your information is protected, it's safe, and that you can go about your normal daily business without having that as a worry in the back of your mind.
Asher, thank you so much. It was fantastic. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Great to be here. Thank you.
Tech Snippets Today with Joseph Raczynski.